Hello and welcome back to Boiler Room Reviews. My name is Ian and today I'm going to be talking about the 1997 novel by Ryu Murakami, In the Miso Soup. This is the second novel I've read by Murakami, the first being Audition, which I did do a review of previously, which is on the channel. Very much enjoyed that one. And just to start off, I think I enjoyed this even more than Audition. So the basic backdrop of this novel is we are in Tokyo and we follow Kenji, who works as a tour guide for mostly foreign tourists, and he shows them around basically the red light district of Tokyo. There's also a backdrop of murders of schoolgirls that have happened recently, which is a bit of foreshadowing going forward. And you will have to forgive me, my pronunciation of Japanese words is absolutely dreadful, so apologies if I'm absolutely butchering anything. But so we follow Kenji. He has a girlfriend, June, and he has a new client called Frank. And they're pretty much the only three characters of any real note in it. There's a couple of side characters, but they're the main ones. So Frank contacts Kenji and he wants to be shown around Tokyo. He says he wants to effectively meet women for sex. So Kenji meets with Frank and we follow them on their adventures, let's say. That's probably not the most appropriate word for it. The book is divided into 3 chapters, which roughly correspond to the 3 evenings they spend together leading up to New Year's in Japan. Kenji can tell straight away that Frank is not your average tourist. There's some very strange things about him. He notes his skin seeming almost translucent, almost as if it's not real. And even in their first night together, he starts to get very concerned about Frank's motivations, his intentions, and he starts to think in the back of his mind that there's a chance that Frank could be linked to the murders that have been happening in Tokyo. Some of Kenji's suspicions are aroused by Frank regaling him with stories of his past that then don't seem to tally up with the actual truth of the situation. For example, Frank tells him about having played baseball when he was younger. So Kenji takes him to a place where you can play baseball. So you stand in a cage and balls are fired at you and you're supposed to hit them back. And Kenji goes in and has a go and they have a bit of a gamble, and then he insists on Frank going in. And Frank seizes up in there. He curls up in a ball. Very strange behaviour. The balls are hitting him. Kenji has to rescue him. And obviously this doesn't tally up with someone who played baseball when they were younger. So Kenji, his suspicions are growing. And throughout this, he's talking to his girlfriend, June, I think her name is, about this Frank and what he's worried about with him and how strange he is. But eventually they go on to the second night. I don't want to ruin the plot, although I feel like at the end of the video I kind of want to talk about some of the elements towards the end of this novel. So I'll let you know when I'm going to throw in some real spoilers. Other things that Kenji notices about Frank is when he's helping him out of the baseball cage or whatever it is, he feels exceptionally cold on his shoulders and arms, almost as if he's not human. And there's another part I won't go into too much detail of for YouTube reasons, but let's say he asks a lady of the night to service him, and she comes back describing a part of his body being very, very strange. And Kenji thinks maybe it's silicone implants. She insists it's not. So he's becoming even more dubious about Frank and what he's all about. And anyone who's read the novel or read about it will know that there's one scene in particular that is very disturbing. And I've read a lot of dark horror. I've watched a lot of horror, and even myself, my jaw was on the floor with elements of this scene. Really quite shocking. But that sort of comes about midway, 2/3 of the way through the novel. So then we have like the third act where there's more of an explanation of the character Frank, which I'll go into towards the end of the video because I don't want to spoil it. But in terms of themes, what themes do we have in this? So the most obvious take is that Frank is a metaphor for the Western influence on Japan in its most negative sense. We also are introduced to the underbelly of Tokyo, and there's definitely themes of loneliness as well. Kenji seems like quite a lonely character. Even though he has a girlfriend, his existence and his job is not something he's particularly proud of. And Frank certainly comes off as a very lonely and obviously strange character. So from now on, I'm going to throw some spoilers in. So if you don't want to hear it, please just sign off. So as I said, if you've already read this before, I'm not telling you anything new. So at the end of the second chapter, there's a scene in the bar where Frank hypnotizes actually first, and then brutalizes about 8 people in the bar. And Kenji is frozen with fear, and he doesn't know what to do. Cutting throats and I'm not going to go into too many details of it because, again, YouTube, terms of service. But yeah, that was quite shocking. And frighteningly enough, there was a moment in this scene that actually made me laugh out loud, where Frank has just murdered someone, and a woman across the room starts screaming. And the woman he's just murdered was singing on the karaoke. So he gets the microphone out of her hand and then approaches the screaming woman and puts the microphone in front of her mouth. And Kenji sat there like, it almost sounds like a song. And that, for some reason, that bit actually made me laugh out loud. It's obviously brutal, surreal, very dark, but kind of a funny image as well at the same time. And Kenji admits that he has a bit of a dark side to himself as well. And he describes Frank when he gets angry, his face changes. And he says that Frank is different from other people when they get angry. He uses the Yakuza as an example. When they get angry, they'd get very heated, hot, whereas he describes Frank as becoming icy cold. There's another moment I found quite disturbing. From memory, I think they're both watching, it's either a karaoke performance or a performance of some kind, a singer. And Kenji's watching it thinking, God, this is so bad that I wish this person would just die. And he looks over and Frank's giving him a look as if to say, I've read your mind and I totally agree. This person needs to die, which was, a very creepy moment. In the third act, after Kenji witnesses Frank murder all of these people, when they leave, Frank says to him, you can call the police now if you want to. Your work here is done. And Kenji, for a lot of different reasons, doesn't. And I saw a lot of criticisms about this. Why didn't he just hand him in? But I kind of sympathise with Kenji in this moment because you couldn't underestimate Frank and what he's capable of. And Frank then goes off to see a lady of the night. And when he comes back, Kenji is still there and he's not called the police. And then Frank does reveal that he had sort of been watching him. And if he had, he would have killed him as well. So in that sense, even as the novel goes on and Kenji doesn't report him, I sympathise with his decision not to because he's at a constant risk. So in the third act, Kenji and Frank spend the night together where Frank has been staying in this abandoned old medical building. And this is where Frank reveals a lot about himself. And he describes his youth. There's very strange things in his background. There was a time when he got lost and his mother found him. But because he was so, not enamoured with being lost, but like he was in a different world, and then his mum broke the spell of it. And he attacks his mother and bites her wrist and drinks her blood from it. And this just sort of escalates through his childhood. He murders people. Was he 4 or 7 years old? There's a scene where he cuts a swan's head off and drinks the swan's blood. And the authorities, they blame this on calcium deficiency, watching splatter films, things like this. But Frank's insistent that this isn't the case. Those aren't the reasons why he behaves like he does. And I think for me, I was questioning at this period, are we supposed to sympathise with Frank? And I don't think the author nor the character are looking for sympathy. I think Frank just wanted to tell someone about his youth and how he was lobotomized and how he's not quite there anymore, and his behaviours aren't necessarily under his control. I think one few humanising bits that I go, yeah, I agree with that, Frank, was when he said, I don't like crowds. He doesn't like being crowded. I was like, okay, I can agree with you on that, Frank. I also saw some other people criticise how Kenji puts his girlfriend in danger. And he does, but he doesn't do it knowingly. On the final night, Frank wants to go and hear the 108 bells ringing. I'm not sure if that's a Shinto or a Buddhist thing. I can't remember. And it's something I had to look up because I didn't know about it as a New Year's tradition, where certain bells are rang 108 times. And my very limited understanding of it was that it's almost like there's 108 guilty pleasures or things like that you can sort of wash away by the hearing of the bells. And Frank wanted to go and hear it to sort of almost purify his soul. And in short, Kenji invites his girlfriend to come there as well and sort of stay in the background and keep an eye on them, just in case Frank tries to kill Kenji on this final night. So Kenji and Frank go there. It's on a bridge and they sit waiting for it. And then Kenji's girlfriend June turns up and Frank turns to him and says, "Oh, there she is," which is obviously quite chilling. Frank already knows what June looks like, and now all the power's in Frank's hands. And the ending here I found a little bit touching, because Frank sort of sees Kenji as a friend now, and he gives him an envelope, a gift, which has some photographs that they took together on their 3 days, and also the feather of a swan, which is, we assume, from the swan that he killed as a boy, which is obviously very creepy but meaningful to Frank. And at this point, Frank leaves them to it and walks off into the miso soup. So Kenji doesn't report him. He's then with June and Frank's off. He goes, and we don't know whether the bells sort of purify him and he reforms, or whether he continues behaving the way he does. As I said, I wouldn't really criticise Kenji for not calling the police, because I'd be absolutely terrified of this Frank. This Frank was one of the best sociopathic characters I've read about in a long time. It's up there with The Killer Inside Me or American Psycho, those kinds of stories. Yeah, an absolutely riveting book. I'd give this a solid 8 out of 10. Easily an 8 out of 10. Couldn't put it down. Absolutely loved it. But yeah, let me know at home, what did you think of this? I'm thinking I'm going to read Piercing by Murakami next, because I feel like a bit of a Murakami phase coming on now. So yeah, any suggestions, please put them in the comments, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.